Good morning. Thank you for coming in today. We are looking for a senior professional to take over our front desk operations. With 5 years of experience, you're coming in at a level where we expect not just task management, but a bit of strategic thinking regarding how the office runs. I want this to be a natural conversation, so feel free to go into detail with your examples. To start off, why don't you walk me through your typical process for opening the front desk for the day?
Good morning. It is a pleasure to be here. I believe the first hour of the day sets the tone for the entire office, so I treat the opening process as a structured ritual to ensure nothing slips through the cracks. I usually arrive early to get ahead of the morning rush. The first thing I do is prepare the physical workspace. I organize the necessary documents, check that we have enough supplies like pens and forms, and make sure the reception area is pristine. I'll walk the floor to ensure the chairs are neat and any informational brochures or signage are displayed properly. Once the environment is set, I move into the digital and operational side. I log into the property management and customer systems immediately to ensure everything is operational. I then review the day's schedule in detail. I look at the appointments, meetings, and any special events that might cause a surge in traffic. I also prioritize my inbox, looking for any urgent messages or requests that came in overnight so I can address them before the phones start ringing. Finally, I brief the rest of the support team on the day's priorities. By the time the doors officially open, the goal is for the front desk to be a calm, organized hub ready to handle any scenario.
That sounds very thorough. You mentioned the phones starting to ring. Let's dive into the reality of a busy day. You've likely encountered situations where everything happens at once. Imagine you have 3 tasks hitting you simultaneously. The phone is ringing, a visitor has just walked in and needs direction, and you have a stack of paperwork filing that needs to be completed. How do you prioritize that in the moment?
In a high-pressure environment, prioritization comes down to urgency and visibility. My first action would be to answer the phone. A ringing phone is a time-sensitive signal, and if it goes unanswered, it can look like the business is unresponsive, regardless of how busy I am. I would take the call, acknowledge the caller, and if it is a complex issue, I'd ask to place them on a brief hold or offer a callback. Simultaneously, while I am handling the phone, I would give the visitor a polite nod or a smile to acknowledge their presence so they don't feel ignored. Once the phone is managed, my immediate focus shifts to the visitor. Because they are physically present, their experience is the most visible representation of our company's service. I would direct them or assist them with their needs immediately. The paperwork filing is the lowest priority in this specific triad because it is a back-end task. While it is important for record keeping, it doesn't have a real-time human element attached to it. I would save the filing for the gaps between visitors or the quieter periods of the afternoon. The key is to handle the most urgent and visible tasks first, while ensuring that the administrative duties are still completed by the end of the shift.
That makes sense. Now, let's talk about a different kind of pressure. Not all stress is about volume. Sometimes it's about the nature of the interaction. How do you ensure that your communication remains professional when you are feeling genuinely stressed or overwhelmed?
I think the biggest risk when we're overwhelmed is that our internal stress starts to leak into our external tone. To prevent that, I practice a method of intentional pausing. Before I respond to a difficult client or a demanding manager, I take a brief, conscious breath. This allows me to detach from the feeling of being overwhelmed and refocus on the objective of the conversation. I also focus on using clear, concise language. When we are stressed, we tend to rush our words or become overly emotional, which can be misinterpreted. By slowing down my speech and using structured communication, I maintain an aura of composure. I rely heavily on active listening, which not only helps me understand the problem better, but also makes the other person feel heard, which often de-escalates their own tension. If I find that the workload is truly reaching a breaking point, I don't let it manifest as irritability. Instead, I proactively seek support or delegate tasks if I have a team around me. It is much more professional to say, "Let me find a colleague to help you with that so you get the best service," than to try and do everything and provide a mediocre experience.
Speaking of difficult interactions, let's talk about a common front desk friction point. Suppose a client is highly agitated. They need an immediate answer to a question, but that answer requires internal coordination with other departments. They aren't happy about waiting. How do you de-escalate that?
The core of de-escalation is validation. When a client is agitated, they usually feel that their urgency isn't being recognized. My first step is to acknowledge that frustration. I would say something like, "I completely understand why this is urgent for you, and I apologize that I don't have that answer right this second." By validating their feeling, I move from being an obstacle to being their advocate. Then I provide transparency. I explain exactly why I can't give an immediate answer, but I do it without using technical jargon or sounding like I'm making excuses. I'll explain that to give them the most accurate information, I need to coordinate with the finance or legal team, for example. The most important part is setting a realistic timeline. I avoid saying I'll get back to them as soon as possible, because as a client, that feels vague. Instead, I'll say, "I am going to contact the department head now, and I will give you an update by 2:00 p.m. today, even if the final answer isn't ready yet." This gives them a concrete expectation to hold on to. I then follow up personally, ensuring they feel valued and heard throughout the process.
That's a great approach. Now, let's pivot to a more delicate area, confidentiality. In an administrative role, you're the gatekeeper. Can you explain what confidentiality means to you in this context, and why it's so critical?
To me, confidentiality is the bedrock of trust in an administrative role. It means that any sensitive information I encounter, whether it is a client's personal phone number, a company's financial records, or a private conversation between executives, remains strictly private. It is only shared with individuals who are explicitly authorized to have that information. It is critical because the consequences of a breach are severe. From a business perspective, leaking a company secret could lead to a loss of competitive advantage or a drop in stock value. From a legal perspective, mishandling personal data can lead to massive fines under regulations like GDPR or HIPAA. But on a human level, it's about reputation. If employees or clients feel that the front desk is a source of gossip or leaks, they will stop trusting the organization. Professionalism in this role is defined by how well you can hold information.
Since you've been in this field for 5 years, you've likely developed some specific protocols for this. What actual measures do you take to handle sensitive or confidential materials passed to you?
I treat the handling of sensitive data as a rigorous protocol rather than a casual task. First, there is a verification phase. If someone hands me a document or sends a request for information, I verify the sender's identity and the legitimacy of the request. I don't just assume that because someone is an employee, they have the right to see a specific file. For physical documents, my rule is a clean desk policy. Nothing sensitive ever stays on the counter. I store them in locked cabinets immediately. For digital files, I use password-protected folders and restrict access permissions so that only the necessary parties can enter. When I have to share this information, I avoid standard email if it's highly sensitive. I prefer encrypted channels or, in some cases, hand-delivering the materials to the authorized person. I also believe in a paper trail. I maintain a log of who accessed the information and when. And finally, the disposal phase is just as important as the storage phase. I ensure that all physical copies are shredded and digital files are permanently deleted using secure methods once they are no longer needed. I also make it a point to stay updated on the company's specific security policies, as these often evolve with new technology.
Let's test your judgment with a hypothetical. You suspect that some staff members are engaging in unethical behavior or some form of misconduct. You aren't 100% sure, but the signs are there. Who do you report this to, and how do you go about it?
This is a sensitive situation that requires a balance of courage and caution. My first step would be to refer to the company's established reporting procedures. Typically, this means notifying my direct supervisor. However, I am mindful that the supervisor might be involved in the behavior, so if that is the case, I would escalate the matter to the Human Resources Department or a designated compliance officer. If the company has an anonymous ethics hotline, that is also a viable option. In terms of how I report it, I avoid speculation. I don't participate in gossip or share my suspicions with other peers, as that can contaminate an investigation and damage reputations. Instead, I focus on documentation. I keep a clear, factual record of what I observed, dates, times, specific actions, and any witnesses who were present. When I meet with HR or a manager, I present these facts objectively. I would say I observed X behavior on Y date, and I felt it was important to bring this to your attention for the protection of the company. My goal is to provide the information and then step back, allowing the professional investigators to do their jobs while I maintain my focus on my administrative duties.
That's a very professional boundary to set. Now, let's move to some operational challenges. We've all had those days where the infrastructure fails. If the power suddenly goes out in the building, what is the front desk's protocol?
The immediate priority during a power outage is safety and communication. First, I stay calm to prevent panic among the guests and staff. I immediately assess the situation. Are the emergency lights working? Is there a known cause? I would then contact the maintenance team or building management to report the outage and get an estimated time for restoration. Simultaneously, I check on the guests. If there are people in the lobby or in elevators, they become the primary focus. If the outage affects electronic locks or security systems, I follow the emergency manual, which might involve manually unlocking specific doors or guiding guests to a safe assembly area. Communication is the most important tool here. I would proactively inform guests about the situation. Instead of saying, "I don't know what happened," I'd say, "We are currently experiencing a power outage and are working with building management to resolve it." I'd provide them with the most current information I have. If the outage is prolonged and affects the ability to provide promised services, I would coordinate with management to arrange alternative accommodations or refunds. The goal is to maintain a sense of control and care, even when the lights are off.
You mentioned managing a team or coordinating with others. How do you handle a situation where a visitor is demanding to speak to a specific person who is simply not available for the day? They are insistent, perhaps even aggressive.
This requires a blend of firmness and empathy. I start by acknowledging the visitor's request politely. I don't just say, "They aren't here." I'll say, "I understand that you really need to speak with Mr. Smith. Unfortunately, he is unavailable today." The key is to immediately pivot to an alternative solution so the visitor doesn't feel they've hit a dead end. I would offer several options. I can assist you myself if you can tell me the nature of the request. I can connect you with another team member who has the authority to help, or I can take your details and ensure Mr. Smith calls you back as a priority tomorrow morning. If the visitor remains insistent, I stay calm and reiterate the options. I avoid arguing or promising that the person will magically appear. By focusing on what I can do for them rather than what I can't, I manage their expectations while ensuring they still feel supported.
Let's go back to those fast-paced moments. You mentioned prioritizing tasks based on urgency. But what happens when you have multiple tasks that are all simple, but there are just too many of them coming in at once? Not necessarily urgent crises, but a flood of small things. How do you stay organized?
When I'm faced with a high volume of simple tasks, I move from a reactive mode to a batching mode. Instead of jumping from one task to another, which creates a lot of mental switching costs, I group similar tasks together. For example, if I have 10 different emails that require simple confirmations, I will handle all of them in one block of time. If I have a series of small filing tasks, I'll do them all at once. I also utilize a quick assessment system. I spend a few seconds scanning the list to determine which tasks are truly urgent and which are just immediate. This prevents me from feeling overwhelmed by the sheer number of items. Furthermore, I look for delegation opportunities. If I have a support staff member or a junior admin, I will delegate the most routine parts of these tasks to them. This isn't just about offloading work, it's about optimizing the team's efficiency. Staying calm is the most important part. Once you start feeling rushed, you start making small mistakes, and in administration, small mistakes in data or communication can lead to larger problems.
That leads me to a question about growth and efficiency. Since you have 5 years of experience, you're likely seeing patterns in how offices run. Describe the steps you would take to analyze and improve an administrative process that has been routine for years, but is clearly inefficient.
I approach process improvement with a mix of data and human feedback. First, I would map out the current workflows step by step. I want to see exactly where a document starts and where it ends. By visualizing the process, I can usually spot bottlenecks, like a step where a document sits on a desk for 3 days waiting for a signature, or redundancies, where 2 people are entering the same data into 2 different spreadsheets. Next, I interview the people actually doing the work. I'll ask the team members, what part of this process frustrates you the most? Or where do you feel we waste the most time? Often, the people on the front lines have the best insights into where the process is broken. Once I have the map and the feedback, I research best practices. I look at how other high-performing offices handle the same task or see if there is a software tool that could automate the manual parts. I then propose a small, measurable change. I don't suggest overturning the whole system overnight because that creates resistance. Instead, I'll say, let's try using this digital form for 1 week and see if it reduces the filing time. I test it on a small scale, collect the data, and then refine the process based on the results. This iterative approach ensures that the improvement is actually effective and that the team is on board with the change.
I appreciate that strategic approach. Now, let's talk about a more specific scenario. A visitor comes in and claims they have an appointment, but they have no confirmation email, no invite, and they aren't in your calendar. How do you verify their identity and their appointment status without being rude?
The goal here is to be a detective while remaining a host. I would start by staying very polite and gathering basic details. I'd ask for their full name the purpose of their visit, and the name of the person they are scheduled to meet. I treat this as a standard verification step rather than an interrogation. Once I have those details, I cross-check them with our internal scheduling system. If I don't see a match, I don't immediately tell them they are wrong. Instead, I'll say, I'm not seeing a confirmation on my current list. Let me double-check with the department head to make sure I didn't miss anything. This allows me to contact the relevant staff member directly to verify if a verbal agreement was made that wasn't logged in the system. If the staff member confirms there is no appointment, I then ask the visitor for a government-issued ID to verify their identity for our security records. Then I explain the situation clearly. It looks like there was a scheduling misunderstanding. I'm so sorry about that. I would then offer a path forward, such as helping them reschedule right now or directing them to the appropriate contact to resolve the issue.
Let's talk about technology. We're moving toward more automation. What role do you think technology plays in modern front desk operations? And how do you adapt when you're asked to learn a new system quickly?
Technology has shifted the front desk from being a simple checkpoint to being an integration hub. It streamlines everything from check-ins and reservations to billing and security. When we use property management software or digital key systems, we reduce human error and, more importantly, we free up the staff to focus on the human element. If a computer handles the data entry, I can spend more time actually talking to the guest and making them feel welcome. Regarding adaptation, I approach new systems with a mindset of curiosity. I don't wait for a formal training manual if I can help it. I like to get into the software, explore the settings, and try to break things in a test environment to see how they work. I also believe in creating a bridge between the new technology and the daily workflow. When a new system is implemented, I often create a cheat sheet or a quick reference guide for the rest of the team. This helps everyone get up to speed faster and ensures that the transition doesn't disrupt the guest experience. If I hit a wall, I'm not afraid to reach out to it or the software provider to understand the deeper logic of the tool.
Since you mentioned technology, let's talk about basic support. Sometimes visitors struggle with the simple things, like Wi-Fi. What are your go-to troubleshooting steps for a visitor who can't get connected?
I handle tech support with a lot of patience because I know it can be frustrating for the visitor. My first step is always the most basic. Check if the device's Wi-Fi is actually turned on. It sounds simple, but it happens more often than you'd think. Then I verify they are selecting the correct network and that they are entering the password exactly as written, paying attention to capitalization. Next, I check for airplane mode. If that's off and it's still not working, I'll suggest the classic fix: toggle the Wi-Fi off and on again or restart the device. These small resets often clear out minor glitches. If the problem persists, I'll check a different device to see if the network itself is down. If the network is functioning for others, I know the issue is specific to the visitor's device, at which point I can either provide an alternative connection method or contact our IT support for a more advanced fix. The key is to make the visitor feel that I am solving the problem with them, rather than just telling them what to do.
Let's switch gears back to communication. In a busy office, messages get lost or misremembered. How do you ensure that important messages are relayed accurately to the intended recipient?
I use a structured verification process to eliminate the telephone game effect. First, I practice active listening. When I'm taking a message, I don't just write down what I hear, I listen for the core intent. Once the caller or visitor finishes, I summarize the main points back to them in my own words. I'll say, just to make sure I have this right, you are calling regarding the quarterly report and you need a response by Thursday afternoon. This gives the sender a chance to correct any misunderstandings immediately. When I relay the message, I use a standard format: who called, when they called, the specific reason, and the required action. I avoid using jargon or vague phrases like, "they seemed upset." Instead, I provide factual context. Finally, I close the loop. I don't just leave a sticky note. I prefer using email or a digital messaging system where there is a timestamp and a record of the communication. I then ask the recipient to confirm receipt. If it's a high-priority message, I'll follow up with a quick verbal check to ensure they've seen it. This end-to-end tracking ensures that no critical information falls through the cracks.
We've talked about a lot of scenarios. I want to touch on policy. In many companies, policies change frequently, sometimes weekly. How do you ensure that all your routine tasks remain accurate and up-to-date when the rules keep shifting?
When policies are fluid, relying on memory is a liability. I implement a system of living documentation. I maintain a central digital reference guide, whether it's a shared Google Doc, a Notion page, or a company intranet, that contains all front desk procedures. This document is edited in real time. When a policy changes, the master document is updated immediately. To ensure the team is aligned, I set up a quick notification system. A dedicated group chat or a brief morning email alert serves as a signal that a change has occurred. For example, if the guest check-in policy changes, I'll send a quick alert: "Policy update on check-ins, please see the reference guide." I also advocate for brief, regular huddles. A 5-minute check-in once a week allows the team to ask questions about the new policies and clear up any confusion. I also use checklists. When a policy changes, I update the checklist first. This ensures that even if someone is having a stressful day, they can follow the steps on the list and remain compliant with the latest rules.
Last question for me. Let's go back to the concept of urgent tasks. You mentioned assessing impact and deadlines. Can you give me a real-world example of a time you had multiple competing urgent requests and how you navigated that?
In my previous role, I had a morning where 3 urgent things hit at once. An executive's flight had been cancelled and they needed a new booking immediately. A high-value client had arrived unannounced and was waiting in the lobby, and the office's main phone line was experiencing a glitch that was dropping half the calls. I first assessed the impact. The phone line was a systemic failure affecting every single client, so that was the highest priority. I immediately contacted the service provider to open a ticket and put a temporary automated message on the line to inform callers we were experiencing technical difficulties. This mitigated the damage to our reputation. While the phone issue was being handled by the provider, I turned to the client in the lobby. Because they were a physical presence, I gave them my full attention for a moment, escorted them to a comfortable waiting area with refreshments, and let them know I was handling a brief technical glitch but would be with them in exactly 2 minutes. This made them feel valued and managed the visibility aspect of the crisis. Then I handled the executive's travel. Since that was a digital task, I was able to book the new flight in a few quick clicks while the client was settling in. By breaking the urgencies into systemic, human, and administrative categories, I was able to resolve all 3 without any of the parties feeling neglected. I communicated the plan to the executive and the client, set expectations, and once the phone line was back up, I did a final sweep to ensure all the dropped calls were returned.
That is a perfect example of senior-level management. It shows you can think about the system and the individual simultaneously. Well, that covers everything I wanted to ask. I really appreciate the level of detail you provided today. We'll be in touch regarding the next steps very soon.
Thank you very much for your time. I enjoyed the conversation, and I look forward to hearing from you.